I don't know how many of you have ever celebrated New Year's Eve at a Japanese temple, but the experience is usually solemn and comforting. At least, that's what I believed until last winter, when I joined my university friends for Joya no Kane, the sacred tradition of ringing the temple bell 108 times at midnight to cleanse one's soul of the 108 earthly desires. It's said that when the bell tolls for the 108th time, any lingering negativity is extinguished. In theory, that last note should fade into silence, and that's it. But what happens when there's a 109th toll? Our group consisted of 5, me, Kenji, my girlfriend I, and our 3 friends, Shun, Nao, and Reina. We traveled to a remote mountain temple outside Kyoto, thinking a more secluded site would offer a deeper, more authentic experience. Little did we know, that distance meant fewer witnesses to what was about to happen, and fewer people to help us. The old temple stood on the slope of a wide valley filled with silent cedar forests and blanketed in a milky white fog. Snow had fallen earlier in the evening, leaving a thin, crunchy layer on the winding path. Paper lanterns lined the walkway, casting long shadows on the powdery ground. A single watchful priest, an elderly man named Yamamoto, greeted us at the main gate and explained the tradition. He'd be officiating the ceremony, counting each toll. There were a few other visitors scattered around, mostly locals who'd come to pray. At exactly 11:40 p.m., the priest gathered us by the massive bronze bell. It hung beneath a sloping roof, ropes braided around its wooden striker. Yamamoto began to chant, a low murmur that reverberated in the stillness. One by one, we stood in line to strike the bell. Each toll was deep and resonant, like thunder rolling far in the distance. With every heavy clang, cold air rattled in my chest. We were told each strike banished one of the 108 earthly desires, things like greed, anger, pride. The first few rings felt ceremonial, almost comforting. But as we approached the 90th toll, I noticed a shift, the air grew sharply colder. My breath condensed into thick clouds, and goosebumps crawled up my arms. I glanced at I, who offered a tentative smile, trying to reassure me. Something about the hush that had fallen over the courtyard felt off. Even the crickets had gone silent. We reached the 108th toll at precisely midnight. The bellowing note of the bronze bell echoed across the valley. People sighed softly, bowing their heads. This was supposed to be the moment of spiritual release, of gratitude and cleansing. But the echo did not fade away into peaceful quiet. Instead, there was a disorienting overlap, like an after effect stretched too long. It sounded as if the bell was still ringing in some distant plane. Then, an ear-splitting, metallic clang filled the air once more. A 109th toll. People gasped. Nobody had touched the striker. The priests stood on the wooden steps, eyes wide, hands trembling. Even from a distance, we could see how pale he'd become. Before we had time to process what had happened, the sky flashed. For an instant, the silhouettes of the temple's roof and the surrounding pines stood out in an electric glow. A freezing gust of wind blasted through the courtyard, strong enough to knock Shun off balance. I heard someone scream. Then came the illusions, shadows moving in the corners of my vision, creeping across the ground like living tendrils of darkness. The priest shouted something in a panicked voice. I heard the word portal and opened. Nao, who was studying folklore, grabbed my arm. He says the 109th toll unleashed the 108 spirits of desire, she whispered. They represent everything from envy to wrath. They're basically the embodiment of humankind's darkest impulses. I wanted to laugh it off as a superstition, but after that unnatural flash of light and the seeping gloom, swirling across the courtyard, I couldn't. People started scattering. A few visitors raced for their cars parked near the base of the temple steps. Others froze, transfixed by the shapes forming in the swirling mist. Shun pointed east, where we saw a hunched figure lurch behind a stone lantern. It was translucent yet entirely real, warped limbs and elongated claws, scraping the icy ground. My heart pounded against my ribcage. This was no trick of the light. The priest hurried over and practically pushed us toward the main hall of the temple. Inside, the walls were lined with ancient scriptures and dusty scrolls. Yamamoto pored over an old text, flipping through pages marked with tattered bookmarks. "The spirits, they must be sealed before dawn," he muttered, voice trembling. "If not, they will stay in our world, feeding on fears and desires indefinitely." His eyes burned with urgency. "We must return them by replicating the ceremony in reverse. We learned that to seal the portal, we have to strike the bell again, but in a very particular sequence, effectively subtracting each ring from 109 down to 0 before sunrise." But out there in the courtyard, dozens of malevolent presences roamed in the gloaming darkness. The moment we stepped out, we felt them. They were intangible yet oppressive, moaning in voices reminiscent of flawed, desperate humanity, like 1,000 regrets blending into one anguished wail. We formed a plan. 2 of us would guard the bell, continuing the reverse toll, while the others would protect us, keep the spirits at bay with whatever spiritual wards we could find. Yamamoto gave us small talismans, telling us to recite a protective mantra. Easier said than done when your heart is about to burst out of your chest. At the bell, Shun and I took hold of the heavy striker. Our breaths trembled in the freezing air. We struck once, the metallic note echoing. Thunder rippled overhead. The ground shifted beneath our feet, as if protesting. Another ring, another. Each time the bell's sound faded, a cluster of shadowy figures shrieked, dissolving momentarily, only to re-emerge a few yards away. I and Raina stood on either side of us, chanting through chattering teeth. At the edges of the courtyard, twisted shapes flickered, some tall and emaciated, others carrion-like, with intangible, ragged wings. A stench like decaying leaves and stagnant water clogged my nostrils. The entire temple felt alive with dread. As the bell's count went backward, 108, 107, 106, some spirits hissed and dissipated, but others fought the beckoning pull of the receding portal, clawing at the earth, leaving phantom streaks of black in the snow. Time stretched thin. With each ring, I felt my arms grow heavier, fatigue setting in from the cold and the relentless tension. My entire body shuddered every time we struck the bell. More than once, I thought of giving up, but the sight of those roiling phantoms snapping at our friends kept us going. Finally, we reached the final reverse toll, what we believed was the 0th ring. The sky had begun to lighten with the faintest hint of dawn. We braced ourselves and struck the bell one last time. A deafening roar swept across the temple grounds, echoing among the mountains. My eardrums felt like they might burst. Voices, human, demonic, unearthly, all wailed in unison. The chord rose to a harrowing peak, then cut out in eerie silence. I don't remember collapsing, but I must have. When I came to, the sun was peeking over the treetops, painting the courtyard in pale gold. The snow glistened, unmarred except for footprints and the occasional scuff where we'd slipped. No swirling shadows. No inhuman shapes drifting among the tombstones. The bell hung motionless, dusted in frost. I heard faint birdsong, a surreal calm after the storm. A single set of footprints led to the temple gate. Priest Yamamoto had gone to check on the other visitors, presumably. One by one, my friends stirred, groggy but intact. We shared a look of disbelief, relief flooding in. We made it. The malevolent spirits were gone, forced back into whatever realm opened during that 109th toe. We left the temple soon after, not speaking much, only exchanging nods of gratitude. That morning, as we walked toward the rugged parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only just escaped something we could barely comprehend. The ancient tradition of Joya no Kane had been manipulated by one extra, sinister toll, and we narrowly prevented 108 entities from forever haunting our world. We've all celebrated New Year's differently ever since, quiet dinners at home, a simple toast to the future, and no more temple visits at midnight. Once you witness how thin the veil can be between the seen and unseen, you can't unlearn it. And just because the bells fall silent doesn't mean what rattles on the other side won't try to slip through again.